So the objective is to provide some useful advice to small to mid-sized firms in the electronics or wireless industries on how to deal with this issue. The format is I'm going to give you a short history of the problem for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to allow each company to discuss their ideas one by one, and Tim will introduce each company as they come up. They're in alphabetical order. Then we'll have another 10 minutes among the panelists themselves to discuss what they perceive to be some of the common ideas or good ideas that were presented by all of them. And then we'll have at least 15 minutes for audience Q&A, and I'll have a very short summary at the end. Next slide, please. So the panelists, we have Cielo Networks. Eric Lee is the CEO of Cielo Networks. Cielo Networks makes microwave radio for point-to-point communications. We have Scott Jones, who is the sales manager for DX Engineering. DX Engineering makes amateur radio. Well, they provide amateur radios and amateur radio accessories. John Paul Beauchamp is the senior manager with Icom America, and they provide land mobile radios. They're a manufacturer of radios. Carol Hollingsworth is the vice president of sales for JPS. JPS provides land mobile radio voting and interoperability systems and equipment, and also recently added some cybersecurity to their portfolio. Charles Kirmuss, I'm going to have Charles go first actually because he's asked if that's possible. So he'll go first, and then after him, we'll follow Cielo Networks with Eric Lee, and then we'll continue in the order shown. And Charles has multiple offerings, including land mobile radio batteries and accessories. He does vinyl record restoration, as he told us. He does LED grow lights, and he's the president. Tim Duffy is RCA President Emeritus, and he is our facilitator. And my name is John Fasella, and I am the current president of RCA. Next slide, please. So this is the timing. I don't have to spend much on this, except that the idea is to end at 6:30. If we run a little bit after, that will be fine, and especially if the audience has a lot of questions. As you submit questions through the chat or the Q&A, Tim Duffy will moderate those questions and forward those to the panelists. Okay, next slide, please. So this is going to be a very short introduction in history. I did a little research on this, and outsourcing and manufacturing from the US has been developed over decades. Next slide, please. So this is a very incomplete history of this. To give a complete history would take hours, but it started back in 1868 when Japan, post-revolution, began to industrialize. In the 1900s, textile manufacturers began to move from New England to the South, so that was an outsourcing in a sense. In 1909, approximately, the Radio Corporation of America, not to be confused with the Radio Club of America, became a patent pool for a cartel of General Electric, Westinghouse, and AT&T. In the 1950s, Japan started to manufacture relatively inexpensive toys and other goods. Tim, can you scroll it up a wee bit, please? In the 1950s, David Sarnoff of Radio Corporation of America encouraged Japan to form cartels, much as RCA had done with GE, Westinghouse, and AT&T. Between the 1950 and the 1970s, so over 20 years, Zenith began a long battle with the Radio Corporation of America over the patent cartel. They were not a part of it and felt that they were being excluded unfairly. Next slide. In the 1960s, Zenith was prevented from selling in Japan. They sued. 1971, changing countries a little bit, President Nixon first made his historic visit to China. In '74, Matsushita acquired Motorola's color TV business, which at the time was a very large business. In 1974, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Matsushita and against Zenith. They claimed there was no illegal activity, just, quote, hard competition. In 1979, President Carter restored diplomatic relations with China. In the 1980s, in a completely different segment of the world, the consulting firm of Arthur Andersen started remote consulting services, which led to all kinds of remote services from Asia. By the end of the 1980s, over 40 U.S. consumer electronics manufacturing facilities had closed. Zenith moved its TV manufacturing to Mexico. And in the 1980s and 1990s, the outsourcing of IT began to grow. Next slide, please. So this is a perspective from 2012. At the bottom, there is a reference to a document that was put out by, can you scroll it up just a wee bit, by Tom Ridge, who at the time was the Homeland Security Secretary. And this is a 2012 perspective. Since 1979, manufacturing jobs in the US had declined 40%. 6 million factory jobs had disappeared, and 66,000 factories had closed. By 2012, less than 10% of the US labor force was in manufacturing. This document, Preparing for 21st Century Risks, is a very interesting one, and I would recommend that to anybody that's interested. Next slide, please. So it's important to look at from the perspective of how the trade relationship has gone. This particular article in the Asia Pacific Journal is really excellent. It goes into the deep history of our relationships with China from the very beginning, even during feudal times, and explains a lot of reasons why we got into a trade deficit, which in 2005 and 2006 was characterized as the largest deficit it has ever recorded for the US with a single economy in history. In 2012, China exceeded the United States as the largest trading nation in the world, and we became their largest export market. Next slide, please. So these, I'm not going to spend any time on these slides, but they show between 71 and 80, and then 81 to 1990. And you can see that the growth in trade with China was significant. Next slide. The result of that was loss of manufacturing. I used to work for Motorola. The entire Schaumburg campus has basically disintegrated, and that's a picture from it. This is another bunch of Ford plant closings. Of course, that's not electronics, but it's manufacturing. Next slide, please. So here's some other perspectives on this. Tim, if you could roll it up just a wee bit, please. The Duke Fuqua School of Business came up with what they see as 3 major reasons why we have this trade surplus right now, and especially this supply chain thing. And they say that the 3 issues, in their view, is COVID, creating a shortage of workers, distortions to demand due to changes in customer purchasing behavior, and manufacturing and logistics systems that do not have a lot of excess capacity. They make a recommendation, including having accurate information and so forth. Next slide, please. So Forbes had a different take on it. They believe that one of the things that was a major problem with supply chain currently is the very popular for several decades now, the lean and just-in-time JIT supply chain strategies. The idea was to basically reduce inventory to free up cash for other things, but the problem is manufacturers did not have any kind of inventory buffer. So if certain parts started to become scarce, then the result was suddenly you couldn't order things, and goods that required many parts suddenly were held up for one or two. And their rationale was three major causes: poor supply chain management, over-concentration in markets. The reason for that is multiple, but one of the things is that to get best buyer advantage, sometimes you want to concentrate on one supplier. But this, of course, works completely against you when that one supplier doesn't have enough parts. Next slide, please. And sub-optimization, which they consider that instead of directing all parts of the company to achieve a common goal, the silo divisions work on supply chain completely independently. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend any time on this, but these are some recent headlines. You've all been reading the press, so we all know there's a problem. Next slide, please. So in summary, we live, and we have for many decades live in a very highly interconnected, interdependent world. Moving manufacturing and services outside the U.S. is a long-term issue. We can't fix this quickly. Many issues contribute to the supply chain problems, including an overemphasis on non-U.S. factories, COVID, demand distortion, and so forth. So let's hear some ideas. And Tim, let's kick off with Charles, and then after Charles, you can introduce Eric Lee Sileo.
Okay, so Charles, you're up first, and let's get it started.
Well, I appreciate the courtesy of pushing me up because I'm doing seminars here at my dealer here in Chicago for the last 2 days, and today's one of those appointments where people come in at specific times. One of the things that I'd like to touch momentarily on, John, is expand a bit of what you just said before, some of the solutions that I've adopted in my company. I'm on my 4th decade now. I was the CEO of General Electric in Canada when I was 21 years old, and I had 389 employees, and I actually opened up new divisions, and I had to do everything from supply chain management, contract management, sourcing, manufacturing, deciding on what products either inside or outside that we had to bring to market, and take some of the technologies that GE had and introduce them into commonplace market out of the military. And one of the things that we've all realized is COVID has, unlike what Forbes and other, I think tanks have expressed, is the fact that we now have a new world order. In speaking from the point of view of the president of Texas Instruments Parts and the vice president of Microsystems Parts and their key suppliers to chips, it is not the fault of the chip factory in Japan that had the fire that created the automotive industry shut down with just one chip. We now had other components, as John so mentioned, that we rely on, and we never expected that 2/3 of the population in the world will now be working at home. And while we always had, just-in-time deliveries in the automotive industry, just as in my industry where I make my own products, we unfortunately saw the increase of computers, laptops, batteries, chargers, printers, where companies such as HP and Canon cannot still deliver printers today, and they cannot deliver inks for their inkjet and laser printers today because they don't have the chips that have to talk to the printers. So they are actually publishing how to bypass the protection systems they have. So it's a brand new world order. So add all of this into a situation where the banks, unfortunately, we have to deal with overseas manufacturing. So most of my products are manufactured at a partially owned factory that I own in Shenzhen. We don't get the same access to technology as the Japanese, the Hong Kongese, the Taiwanese, and the Chinese have, where within a 15-kilometer area, they can source anything. We don't have that here. So we have issues. So in my issue is where in parts and chips, the issue is I'm very lucky, except for my battery situation, where those chips now are 700 and 800-day deliveries if I order. I have already a year ago started to order double the quantities that we expected for last year to be bought this year. So we started to accelerate our product ordering of our mainline components that we cannot get elsewhere. So we have, unfortunately, we have sole source chips that we cannot get anywhere else unless a factory came out with a new wafer plant. And that's what the vice president of Microsystems explained to me. She said that we do not have the wafer capability to be able to produce the new demand for every chip manufacturer. And even if she says they're opening up a brand new plant in New Mexico, it will not help the supply chain until 3 years down the line. So what I've had to do is I've had to spend money and try to get products. And the chips I actually had to do to fill orders last year, I had to go to second source markets. So I started to communicate to the PCB recyclers that recycle electronics and asking them for these very sought after components that I had to have someone desolder and then retest with thermal vacs to see if we can sell them as new. And we had to indicate in our products that these chips, for warranty purposes, we will guarantee that they are from refurb. Otherwise, last year, not this year, last year, we would have been out of business with selling chargers and intelligent batteries. So that was my workaround, as is the case right now for the laptop industry. They are recycling AMD and Intel chips from recyclers. So that's one of the suggestions for someone that's stuck with one manufacturer that manufactures 100% of the chips for every single charging manufacturer. So now we've caught up. So now we have products, and we now have actually surplus, which allows me to respond to orders within 3 weeks. And we're actually sharing that new inventory to our competitors when they call. So we're always very cautious. So that's one of the things that we've done. The other issue is trying to get product here to America. Companies such as FedEx, UPS, while they have their own planes and DHL, FedEx and UPS run with ANA Airlines. They use United Airlines. They need China Airlines, EVA Airlines, as they have passenger service. And in the belly of the plane, they send products over to America and to me. The problem is China is shut down again. There are no flights going in and out of Shanghai. Shenzhen was shut down 2 weeks ago. Forgetting about the port issue that John mentioned earlier, I am now shipping products to Australia, of all places, through FedEx and UPS at better rates than I can get with FedEx to United States, because they still have their capacity of FedEx flights going back and forth to Australia, and Australia has no problem coming to America because they have not shut down all international flights. They're reopening. So I'm now having a warehouse in Australia, keeping inventory for me and then shipping it at a more reasonable overnight service or 3-day service or 1-week service by air, rather than going to the container route, where I still have shipments that are stuck since August 4th that are arriving in America next week. And unfortunately, the price went from $1,300 a container to $28,000 a container. So it's difficult, but I'm working now with other people in other areas that I can also, instead of having a half container, consolidate at least with them. But I'm focusing on not using the cheap Maersk line containers. I am running all my container business through FedEx FTN Cargo, because when the ship does arrive in Los Angeles or Port Angels or wherever, FedEx has their own truckers that will not delay my process once the container has come off the boat. Whereas the contemporaries that buy the cheapest, they are, and I bought the cheapest in August, I'm stuck with it. It's a 6-month delivery. If I use FedEx FTN, I get now a guaranteed 2-month delivery. So I've changed the way that I handle, my consolidation of my shipments using an airline FedEx with their Shanghai office that has their own guaranteed port facilities and drivers. So we're not stuck with people waiting for containers to be picked up after they've been unloaded in Long Beach for like 3 months. So that's, that's part of my logistics issue that I've worked on. And again, the other issue that we're all running into is if we have UL approved products, I have 3 products that I'm stuck with where UL, as soon as you change a component, especially in an LMR product or a consumer electronics product, you have to go to the lab and retest. The lead time for UL in the United States in Northbrook, 10 miles from where I am, and I went to see them yesterday, is 8 months. So if I change a component in my power supply, they will only see me 8 months later. And I have 2 new products that I've been trying to release. So what I've now done is I have gone to ETL and Intertech in Germany, not China, because the Chinese are right next to the factories that are changing the components. So those laboratories are now saying, Charles, we can have your product done in 3 months. Obviously, I'm paying a premium. Instead of $5,000 at UL in Guangzhou in China and $15,000 here in UL, ETL used to be cheaper along with Intertech. They are now at the same US prices, but in Germany.
Charles, you have 60 seconds.
Right. Thank you very much for that. So the other issue is something that John perhaps touched on. We're globally connected. And because this COVID is shutting down my factory for 2 weeks, last month in China, Germany is a big problem as well, because they have been shut for 1.5 years. They just reopened last summer. Then they were shut for 8 weeks for holidays. Then they were shut down for Christmas. So I don't have any solution other than spending more money, expecting longer deliveries, but I've been able to circumvent and live with that. So thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you so much for coming today, Charles. We appreciate you rearranging your schedule, and we wish you the best in Chicago. I happen to be in Germany right now, so I'm familiar with those 2 places. So thanks, and Charles, have a good day.
Yeah, and I'll try to stay here for another 15 minutes to be considerate and learn as well.
All right. Thank you, Charles. And with that, I'd like to bring up our next speaker, and it's Eric Lee from Sileo. Eric, thanks very much for being here, and please go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Good.
You've got 10 minutes.
Okay, so for the backgrounder, that Cielo is a vendor of licensed microwave backhaul radios. We're serving primarily U.S. industrial enterprise customers, government branches, all the 3-letter agencies, and locally that we do a lot of backhauls for 2-way radio base stations for local police, fire, and other public agencies. The company has been a part of a Selectech family of companies since 2020, so we can deliver a comprehensive wireless projects to customers now. So the part of the supply chain problems that we'd like to bring up is a little bit different, because obviously we are part of the we are a electronics hardware producer. So we do go through the software, digital boards, and RF subsystem designs, and the part of the problem right now is the circuit board production. So, in the good times that we do monitor the lead times. A lot of the parts are in stock, and we monitor the hard to get sometimes stock the parts that maybe have 4 to 8 weeks of lead time. We do watch for sole source components, and those are unfortunately in RF systems that there are a lot of sole source parts that we just can't get alternates. So it is part of life of doing wireless systems. Most of the times that the contract manufacturers usually take care of all the part sourcing and just let us know if there's any problem. Sometimes we give them a consignment parts, but most of the times we get lazy in good times because they are able to take care of the things and mostly within the reasonable lead time. And we don't particularly have to supply them with a lot of parts or monitor the sourcing issues. Obviously, for circuit boards that we can't go to production unless we have all the parts. I mean, every part has a function and a purpose. I mean, nothing is for decoration, right? So we have to get all the parts in to be able to go to production, right? So the common problems that that we're seeing out there, as Charles mentioned, the shipping logistics, we all have that because we bring in the antennas from China sometimes, and those are large antennas, pay enormous prices, or actually we find alternatives in the U.S. There's a company that has a factory in Mexico that we're able to actually truck in very easily. So, but certain things are made in China specifically that are particularly suitable for certain applications. And unfortunately, we can't use them at this point because each antenna is going to have a $12,000 of shipping cost, and that's just not going to be. I can't even bring that to the customer and say, "Well, you're going to have to pay a surcharge of $12,000." Just not going to work. So, what we have seen in the last a year or two is a dramatic increase in lead times of parts. And in 2022, this has become a full-scale problem. We can't even find parts at the vendors, distributor, anywhere. The lead time is actually almost a year at this point. So we have to go to gray market, black markets, whatever you call it, to be able to find parts. Let me give you an example. FPGA parts, usually there are two suppliers. Now, they used to be independent companies, now actually AMD and Intel. These are fairly commonly used processor parts. Most electronics companies use them. They're quoting a spring of 2023 delivery right now. So, it might as well just give up, right? So these parts actually are about $20. A regular price is about $20. And then if you go to the gray market right now, I just went through that last week, $600 per part. So that's a 30 times increase in terms of the as compared to the regular pricing. So, and this is not just the Intel or AMD alone. Right now, that companies like Analog Devices are having about a year lead time as well. So, what do you do as a company? Well, you can ask the customer to pay 2x prices. I mean, customers are used to paying 10 to 20% more these days, and everybody's asking the customers to pay increased prices due to logistics. But I can't really bring that well, you're gonna have to pay twice amount because I'm having problems. I don't think the customers are really at that point that entertain. They're not gonna entertain a sob story from a vendor that says I got a parts problem here. So. The only solution that we have, the only fundamental solution that we have is to redesign the circuit board to get rid of those parts that have the long lead times. Of course, this is not a good exercise because we're not really enhancing the product in any ways. We're just redesigning to get rid of the parts that are hard to get, and that really wastes engineering time and money that would otherwise be useful for a next generation products. So. I mean, that product, that exercise itself is really a painful one. And the reason for all of this, I was mentioned that the JIT is largely responsible, I think, in my opinion, because a lot of the large companies are subscribing to that JIT model. And then now they're caught off guard and they're just going around and buying everything in sight. And they use the muscle because they have the cash deposit abilities, and they have the buying power to be able to sort of muscle basically they kind of twist their arms of the vendors to basically get the lion's share of the parts available. So they kind of lock out the market for smaller companies with smaller volumes. Unfortunately, that's what seems to be happening. And this is from a purchasing director that I know from Samsung TV factory in Tijuana. They have a 22 million TV set volume per year. So, they have all the all the purchasing power, but they are one of those JIT companies because, for example, they were getting deliveries of boxes 3 times a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening, to fit the schedule during the day, right? If they were getting to that level of granularity in terms of getting the parts in or the inventory in. So now they're turning around and saying, forget the JIT now. They're buying everything inside well into 2023 just to meet their production schedules, and they have the same problems because Best Buy is basically telling them this, I need to have this type of TVs on a certain date and everything. So the JIT in the end is, I think, is sort of compounding the COVID problem in a big way, and so in the end that the industry has to sort of realize that the minimal level of inventory is good so long as there's no problem. But we have problems everywhere. In fact, we had a big problem with the COVID. So I think that we're going to have to change sort of the way we think about how to put the inventory and for the future, or at least for the foreseeable production runs, so that we don't run into these type of problems. Again, everybody's doing the same thing now, so it's almost like a LA freeway gridlock. Everybody's going everywhere, trying to get anything anywhere. So it's a problem that we're facing across the entire industry. So really, the solution that I have is not great.
60 seconds, Eric.
We went through some redesign of the board, and so that is rather painful, but it must be done. But for the future, really just stock up on the critical parts and critical inventory so that the company's revenue is protected over the next 6 to 12 months, and really that diversify the parts sources and have alternate parts available, so that we don't, if we run into critical part problems, we are at least able to go to production. So unfortunately, those are the only solutions I have available. I'd be happy to listen to others and see if they have any better ideas about the source problems.
Thanks so much, Eric. Really impressive insight. And we look forward to your panel comments here in a little bit. And of course, we'll be taking Q&A after the panel has some discussion. And I want to remind everybody that this is the Radio Club of America expanded interview series, and we're talking about supply chain today. And I'd like to go over to Scott Jones with DX Engineering. Scott, your thoughts?
All right, very good. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Very good. So at DX Engineering, it's interesting. So DX Engineering sells amateur radio products throughout the world. Parts of our business is selling other vendors' products like Icom and so forth to consumers, but we also manufacture many of our own products, antennas, electronics, cabling, and so forth. So, Eric and Charles and John have talked about a lot of the issues that are out there, and you're going to hear some of the same sort of thing here, because those issues are kind of universal. So, but our approach is kind of multifold, and so in some ways, it's really important that we keep constant vendor communications going so we can keep dates as accurate as possible for not only internal planning, but those lead times that we get from our vendors are really important so we can protect and inform our customers. They're wanting things, and this is the back order issues are certainly the big customer drivers right now. For certain high demand items, that we normally would ship ocean, and even with air shipments being 3 to 4x what they used to be, we'll still do that because there's such a high demand for some of these products that we're willing to take that hit in order to get our customers satisfied. It does impact margin, but it's something you've got to do to try to. It's just to try to keep customer satisfaction in place. Another thing that we do try to do as well, when we get containers that are shipped from especially in Europe, we'll make sure that they're completely full prior to shipping. So if possible or where practical, we'll combine multiple suppliers into a single container or containers that are completely full. You know, we've done this recently with some of our vendors out of Europe. I mean, it's literally like playing Tetris with the container, trying to get all of the stuff in it and jam packed as much as you can. With the delays in shipment, we want to make sure we get stuff to us and we get it as timely as we can and as fast as we can, but try to limit our exposure from a cost perspective because it's so high. Additionally, I think Eric mentioned leveraging buying power to keep ahead of demand and price increases. That's something that you can try to do. It's difficult. Instead of JIT, we're kind of doing the order early, order often, and order big. You know, this is true with things like aluminum, maybe go into chassis or tubing for antennas and so forth. We're keeping back-to-back orders in the system at all times, with lead times being, gosh, 40, 50, 60 weeks or more. You know, we got to do that. So a couple of quick examples. We were ordering copper braid, for instance. We used to get quotes from our suppliers that were good for 30 days. Last week, we were working on a new order, and the quote was good for literally 24 hours. And additionally, and Eric and Charles both sort of talked about this, and I have a little bit more on it here in a minute. But, you know, we were looking for 4,000 units of a particular component that we needed for some products that we build. You know, we were getting ready to put an order in. 3 days later, they were completely sold out. So the lesson learned there is that you strike early and immediately. Don't wait. These unprecedented times, you've got to rethink your entire process for purchasing. So we keep working on that and trying to make it a little bit better from that perspective. We increase our safety stock and our repurchase trigger points, and just system stuff that you can do to make sure that you can get things that you're going to need in a timely manner. You know, we build antennas and making sure that we have enough stock to build antennas for the next year. You know, historically, we might have done it where we would purchase enough to be able to build antennas for the next 4, 5, 6 months. Now we're purchasing enough for the next year or two, whether it's coax or aluminum or copper or whatever it is. And then making use of multiple or alternative suppliers to provide, you know, product diversity when it's possible. We've seen a couple of cases where some of our suppliers say they don't have stock of something, and then of course you look at others and they don't have stock. But some of those suppliers actually have, you know, supply in both the States and perhaps in Asia and elsewhere, where you can look at them and see if there's a possibility that, you know, maybe they've got stuff at another location that they can get. To prepare to re-engineer is a real thing. We've had several products that we build, some antennas, some electronics that, you know, we would use particular types of, whether it's aluminum or fiberglass or whatever it might be, that simply is no longer available. And because of that, we have to go back and re-engineer our products. Now, if, as Charles mentioned, if you're UL listed or you have FCC type acceptance associated with your various certifications, that's a real problem. Even if you don't, though, it's a painful reality, because these components, for instance, we have a surface mount supplier of just capacitors that are used in variations of certain products. There used to be 10 of them that they made. They're all similar, but there's 10 separate ones. Today they make 4. So you have to be able to quickly look through that and figure out, well, what of those 4, will any of them actually work for what I'm doing? Or do I have to go to a completely different supplier? Or will any of those actually work? And then you have to re-engineer your products to make sure that they work and make sure there aren't any other, that change doesn't cascade a domino into other changes. So all of that re-engineering is just time and resources that, obviously we'd all like to spend doing other things, but it's the name of the game right now, and it's kind of what we have to do. We stock up on components, as I mentioned, if and when we can, but always keeping in the back of our mind, we need to continue to re-engineer as possible. So you can also be proactive with that. If you have products that you have supply, maybe you have a supply of a particular product that you've made and you think you have enough supply for the next 6 months, I would certainly suggest thinking about what you're going to need to do to make the next batch of those products. You need to think about that today. Actually, you need to think about it about 6 months ago, but today's better than waiting 6 months or 4 months, because you're going to find that there's things that you need to build it that just aren't available in the timeframes that you normally or even hope they could be available. We don't necessarily see this getting any better anytime real soon. I mean, we hope so, but it's not looking like that's going to be the case. The other thing too is if you have any circuit boards that you have somebody produce for you, and actually not just the circuit boards, but they stuff them for you, so to speak. You could also take a chance and see, maybe they have supply there, or maybe if you haven't had them being built completely for you, maybe that's something to look at. Maybe their supply capability is different than what you're able to find on your own. But you've got to explicitly ask for that stuff because they're not typically going to offer it up.
Scott, you got 60 seconds, Scott. Yep.
And from my last comments, from our perspective on the bottom line going forward, we got to just keep an eye on all the geopolitical landscape and the constant changing that's going on to try to anticipate some of these future needs and interruptions. Hopefully what we're going through today will serve as a good lesson for the future so that we can be prepared if and when interruptions occur down the road. Some businesses are more impacted by turmoil than others, and some suppliers are impacted obviously by things that are going on in the world. So order early, order often, order big, and be prepared to re-engineer. Thanks for the opportunity, Tim, and back to you.
Thanks very much, Scott. Great notes there. Let's move on to John Paul with Icom.
All I have to do is unmute. Thanks a lot, Tim. I do appreciate it. And just like you or John Fasella mentioned at the beginning of our call, I'm with Icom America, and we obviously are a Japanese company that has been around for many, 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 many years, and we produce world-class radios. So because of our position in Japan, we've found that, our shipping situation is greatly impacted by all of the limitations from COVID and increased sea demands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that our purchasing departments and export department in Japan started to play with right away, post Chipageddon, right? Many of us know that a lot of the electronics problem that we're facing, in addition to COVID, in addition to the manpower situation, et cetera, is as a result of one of the major chip manufacturers burning the ground, AMK. Well, that fire destroyed the largest chip manufacturer in the world, and colloquially called Chipageddon or the chiptastrophe, and we've been forced to figure out what to do next. And like so many of my colleagues on the panel have said, we've had to re-engineer many, many, many radios. With every radio that has to get re-engineered, goes right back to the FCC to be retype accepted. Even our radios that are being re-engineered and sent to Canada or South America, they've got to be retype accepted for whatever governing body is in charge of those RF transmission devices. So it is comprehensive when you start thinking about re-engineering everything and then figuring out how to get it to the right places. So the real reason that John asked me to be here is to pass along some of the things that we have done to make some catch up or some improvement or make the situation less terrible. Is it right, John? That's about right. Not unlike Eric, we came up with different ways to to re-engineer things to make it make more sense. Not only, like the somebody else had mentioned, I think it was maybe this was in our pre-conversation, reducing our SKUs. That was the other thing that we aimed to do is we had to drop down the number of radios that we were producing right now. When you go from 1,800 to 1,400, it doesn't sound like that much, but it makes a difference. So we have played with those numbers, and we have discussed what to do and what products to bring into the US. We've also changed the way we sell, right? So there's a strategy right there is we've had to say, what radios are we going to sell? What products are we going to sell based on what we can get in? So those are a couple of different they seem minor, but they're strategic, and they can make a big difference in your deliverables. But probably the number one thing that we've really, really focused on with our internal team and all of our external facing persons is that we communicate more. We communicate with each other. We communicate with our headquarters in Osaka, Japan. We communicate with our offices back in Kirkland, and then our Canadian offices and our Brazil offices, so that we know where our resources are. And then we double down on the communication, and we try even harder to communicate with our customers, making sure that they know that a 3-month lead time just became a 4-month lead time, or a 3-month lead time is actually only going to be 2 months. Yay! People like to know. Knowledge is power. And when we can push our products to the consumer with a manageable expectation, even if you tell them up front it's going to be 1 year, if anything changes in that, whether it's going to be 10 months or 13 months, whatever it is, we've decided to make a huge effort to communicate those expectations all along the way. So that's critical to maintaining customer base, and that's critical to keeping people satisfied, giving them options along the way. We told you it was going to be 6 months. Unfortunately, it's going to be 8. Would you like to consider something else? Those are all things that you can only do when your team is well educated in your catalog. So the number 2 thing that we've done is we've doubled down on our internal education. So our staff is getting bombarded with product knowledge and big charts to indicate which radios can be substituted for which radios and which batteries can be substituted where, and all of those different things to help have customers that are satisfied. Those are very, very important things, and that's ultimately the goal. We want happy customers. So those are some of our missions. Reducing our SKUs, setting our expectations clearly, and continuing to communicate all the way through the process, and educating your team on your products so you know where to have your eligible substitutions. And then, of course, finally, and I think somebody else mentioned this, shop alternate routes and methodologies to get it to your warehouse and your distribution centers. Be willing to drop ship. Many organizations, myself included, we've strayed from drop shipping for so long, for so many things, for so many reasons, and now the best way to manage your deliverables sometimes is to drop ship. It's just an option. Sometimes the accountants don't like it, but you have to do what you have to do sometimes. So those are my 4 big tips: is communicate, communicate, educate, reconsider your volume of SKUs, your catalog, and then, of course, look at how you're shipping and receiving into the U.S. and out to your customers.
Thank you, John.
How do I do on time, Tim?
No, you did great.
I'll yield the balance of my time to the panel.
All right. Thanks very much. Let's go over to Carol Hollingsworth. Carol, your valued comments, please. No audio, Carol. And you're frozen. No audio, Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got a really bad internet.
Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate being here. I have a little background noise that's unavoidable. I think I can.
Yeah, Carol, the audio.
I don't have the audio.
Carol, the audio.
I mean, now, Tim,
Your internet connection is
I am
pretty bad.
unmuted.
Pretty bad, Carol.
No, I'm unmuted, Tim. I'm sorry if you can't hear me.
We lost him.
Yeah.
I'm sure he was going to say something as clever as buy the products from everybody that is on the panel. Buy
There you
microwave dishes now, get them on order so that you have them. Buy your DX engineering products, etc. I'm sure that's what he was going to say.
So we could move in, John, if it's okay with you, we can move into the panel discussion
Yes.
and keep this thing rolling.
Yep.
And Scott, if you can rejoin us with video and audio again, that would be great. And all right, John, do you have some topics that you'd like to bring up to the panel?
Yeah, I do actually, Tim. So the first question I would throw out is this the end of just in time? I mean, is anybody going to follow that mantra anymore in the foreseeable future?
Well, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Eric. I'll let you jump on this.
Well, I think that it is natural that once this is all over, companies will be tempted back into the JIT programs again. It's kind of a human nature in a way. The mistakes, the lessons from the mistake is sometimes a short-lived ones. And then so I think that, companies will be back to a certain level of JIT, maybe with a little bit of caution, but I don't think that JIT is going to go away.
Okay.
Okay.
John Paul.
John, another question,
what-
John. No,
Well,
John Paul.
I was going to follow up on that if you don't mind. I think that Eric is absolutely right. We're gonna talk about how awful JIT has been and how bad it is right until this whole situation clears up, and then we'll forget all about those nasty comments and just go running right back to it, because it's financially beneficial to so many people and so many factories. I will tell you that my particular organization does not necessarily follow the same JIT rules that a lot of other places do, but at the same time we are probably a victim to it a little bit. But I do think globally this panic is short-lived.
Any thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. People will tend back to the baseline, which is reducing. I mean, they're going to revert right back to what has turned out to what is now in hindsight a bad thing in JIT. But I think they'll return there, but they'll have some cautionary memories that will probably make them say, okay, so we're going to do just in time, but instead of our typical just in time, we'll have a little safety stock. We'll have something sitting on the side just in case we get a bump in the road. But human nature, business nature, if you will, I think will tend to revert back to what has worked for so many decades and decades.
All right, John, another question.
Well, Eric, John Paul, and Charles all mentioned essentially redesign, painful. So I wonder if going into the future, if this is going to be the engineering section managers and leaders are going to say, hey guys and gals, when you design that next circuit or that next widget, let's try to avoid tricky parts. Now, that's kind of trivial to say because sometimes the tricky parts are giving you the performance enhancement that becomes a major differentiator against your competitors. But I just wonder in the process of doing that, how much that might be accommodated. That is to say, not get too dependent on parts that are hard to source or only have a one source kind of supply.
What do you think, John Paul?
You know, tricky parts are a combination of what is loved by the engineer, what is available at the time of alpha and beta testing, and software defined this and software defined that is lovely for so many things, but there's still just so many components and so much of what we do. I don't see it. I think the uniqueness of so many things in this industry is our DNA, right? The way one manufacturer makes a green board with a transmitter on it and another manufacturer does mostly the same thing, the way they do it is their DNA. And I don't see the guys in the front office being able to control the engineering demands as much as we would all like them to. Don't see it.
And Scott, your thoughts?
I got to agree with that pretty substantially. The engineering creativity that's involved in some of these designs, the competitive nature of the designs, of wanting to get to be that a little bit better than the next guy, so that we'll get the sales and the attention, is going to, I think, to a degree, end up trumping some of that desire to limit things. Now, that said, it would still be certainly where possible, making sure you aren't reliant on a single source. That may be something that we remember longer term. Multi-sources might really be something that's considered more. But boy, I think I think that's exactly correct, that it's in engineers' DNA to try to do that next best thing. I think that's going to be very hard to change, and I don't know that it should be changed, to be honest.
Eric, your thoughts?
I'll offer two comments. One, I'm a techie by nature. I run the company now, so I'm going to take all the technical advantage that I can get. If I can push the product to do anything, if I have any additional features that we can bring up, we can have more power, I will get it. So as a high tech company, that what are you if you're not really pushing the engineering to do better, right? So we will take chances. We will take chances on the parts that are the latest and greatest, and then try to bring up to try to use them as much as possible. So as was mentioned, that it's in our DNA to push the boundaries to do better than anyone else in the industry, right? So the second part is that you just don't know which part is going to have problems. That's the nature of the beast. That is that I mentioned the FPGAs. Those are commodity parts in almost, right? We would never think that the FPGAs would be a problem. I remember the days when we had problems with the flash memories. I remember the days when we had problems with tunnel of capacitors, right? So these are sort of commodity parts. All of a sudden, that have a long lead times for no anticipated reasons. So, as much as I can say that I can anticipate these parts are going to have problems, the fact is that we just don't have the crystal ball to find out what's going to happen next year, right?
So, Eric, those are really good points, and I just want to remind everybody who is on this panel discussion here this afternoon, and that we are taking Q&A in the Q&A area or in the chat room, and John will be moderating that. We want to thank you on behalf of the Radio Club of America for attending today, and I hope you're getting some benefit out of this. If you're not already an RCA member, please consider joining. Go to radioclubofamerica.org for more information on how you can become a part of the oldest wireless club in the world. And with that, please put your Q&A or questions into the chat. There are a couple there that John will be working on here in a few minutes. And John, another question for our panel.
Okay, well, I have one more of my own. So Charles mentioned it most specifically, but also John Paul mentioned it, and I know it impacts Eric's company. And that is these certification organizations, these independent testing labs, like for FCC certification, Industry Canada certification, UL for electrical safety. Is there any attempt on your company's part to put pressure on them to shorten the cycle time, given that the supply chain is so messed up?
Scott, your thoughts on that?
Pressuring certification organizations sounds challenging. I think as so many people are resource limited today, I suspect that they are similarly resource limited, and putting pressure on them to do better is challenging. Perhaps there would be a better chance of getting some legislative relief if we could get the definitions of what certifications are required and under what circumstances relooked at. But I don't know. Direct pressure is just challenging, I would think.
All right, let's go over to Eric for your thoughts.
The FCC labs, I think if you go to big ones, certainly TUVs and then the NEMCOs, those big organizations, you're going to have a long lead time. So my trick last year was to look for some smaller companies. And we were able to do the certification for a Japanese market. So we waited about 3 weeks and then got the work started. So it depends where you go, I think. So we tend to look for some smaller players so that that we could reduce the lead time. As far as UL goes, we've given up on UL. I mean, UL is just such a bandit organization in the end that sorry that if you're connected with the UL, but it's such a pain in the ass to deal with them. And our customers don't really seem to. We are basically providing infrastructure products. So UL is really not a factor. So we've gotten rid of a UL certification a long time ago.
Well, thank you, Eric. And John Paul, your comments, please.
So I took a ride down to Washington, D.C. about 1.5 years ago or so, and I begged, barred, and pleaded with a couple of our key groups within the wireless industry, specifically Enterprise Wireless and a couple of the attorneys that are connected to that organization, and also, bargained with the National Wireless Communications Council, both of which I'm on, EWA and WCC. So we asked that question of our attorneys and said, can we get some kind of relief that says that if you are substituting white chocolate for regular chocolate chips in your chocolate chip cookies and your recipe otherwise stays the same and everything else is the same, can we speed up this process? And they actually, the response that we got many weeks later was, yeah, we'll consider that. And so so wasn't that great? They answered me, right? That was fantastic. 14 plus months later, 159 submissions of complete and total re-FCC certification later. And we've had about 35 or 40 where we've gotten the partial acceptance, where they've said, oh, you don't need to go through full type acceptance. You only changed, from this size chocolate chip to that size chocolate chip, you're good. And of course, I'm always making the Nestle chocolate chip cookie recipe comparison just because it's easiest. So so there was some flexibility by the testing organizations. They want to get paid the whole balance, but they also recognize the situation. But you know, trying to budge or trying to move City Hall, you know, I have a little bit of money riding on it with a coworker of mine that we're going to get a grant of, you know, an acceptance from the commission that's going to say, yes, we really need to revisit this. And I think that my estimate is that letter is going to come somewhere around 2024. So I'll let you know, guys, and we'll cash in on that. We'll take advantage of it. Moving City Hall ain't going to happen.
Thank you, John Paul. John, why don't we move into some of the comments and questions in the chat room first?
Sure.
And I see Dave New is really the first one.
Yeah, so Dave New asked the following question for the panel. How can you get a supplier to tell the truth, in quotes? In other words, to let you know before the last minute that they are about to run out of a part?
Scott, think about that.
How do you get them to tell you the truth? Well, so we have some suppliers that we deal with. For example, Icom. We have a great relationship with Icom, and yeah, I mean it's great, and we trust them, and I think it's bi-directional that way. So when you have a good relationship with your vendors, that's helpful. There are times though when unfortunately, you know, just as we've discussed here today, how some of the JIT stuff can bite you. Some of the companies that we deal with from a supplier perspective may not have come to some of those realizations yet. And as they may be trying to, you know, optimistically, you hope that they're trying to be honest with you that they're going to get you stuff next week. And then all of a sudden their processes broke down on the supply side and they have issues and they've got to give you the bad news. But beyond that, you know, you can incent them to tell you the truth somehow. It's just a very, very challenging environment right now. And I'm anxious to hear what the others have to say, because maybe it's something we can make use of.
Yeah, and Scott, as you and I know all too well, in a lot of cases, the vendor doesn't know that they simply don't know the information, and it's constantly changing. And so it's very difficult for us as a company to set realistic expectations with the customer. And so when you set realistic expectations with our customers, they might get upset at you, and they do.
Yes, they do.
Because the dates are so far out, right, Scott?
That's right. I mean, we've had some suppliers who simply, you ask them the question, when am I going to get my, whatever it is, power supply, antenna, it doesn't matter. Or when am I going to get the aluminum that I need to build the stuff that I make? And they're, you know, they're obviously having the same issues that we have. And so it's very challenging. And so we'll move, in some cases, we've moved dates out essentially 6 months into the future for availability, just on hopes that 6 months is long enough. And, you know, if something comes in 3 months, it's a much easier discussion with somebody to say, hey, we thought it was going to be 6, it came in 3, here you go. You know, instead of saying it's going to come in 2 weeks and then 2 weeks. And it's hard, and it's very challenging because we only can go with what we're told. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of good answers here that we've found so far.
Yep. And Eric, your thoughts on lead times and the truth being told by your suppliers?
People say that you can tell someone's character when things when things are good, and everything is fine, but you can tell somebody's character when things are really tough. So this is where actually that the customer service from the suppliers really is varying depending on who you talk to. You know, it's nothing against the Asian suppliers, but they tend to sort of shy away from delivering bad news to customers. So you got to really watch out in some cases that when they say that, oh, I'll get back to you, or next month. You can sort of tell by their behaviors over time whether they're going to be upfront with you or not. So the only thing I can say is that they're not going to change their behaviors all that easily. So you have to diversify your sources to be able to get multiple sort of opinions on certain parts and things like that. But I don't think there's any magic to, unfortunately, we're dealing with Asian vendors over emails and texts and things like that. And so you really can't just influence them any better. So it is what it is, and then you just have to diversify your sources.
Yep, very smart to diversify. John Paul, your thoughts?
I'll be quick. I know the clock is ticking, but I'll just say this. There's no way to ever get anyone, whether it's an Asian supplier, a European supplier, or a South American supplier. It doesn't matter. There's no way to mandate they tell the truth or even know for sure. So I think it's the key move is be a partner, right? Tell them what you need to know and why you need to know it and how often you need to know it, and explain that to them and stay in touch. So be a partner is number one. And number two, which ties into that, is communicate. If you're not getting the new, right, a very wise mentor of mine years ago told me that no answer is an answer. So when you call up 16 times to say, hey, I can't sell these radios without my belt clips, where's my belt clips? It's just an example. The fact that you're not going to call back pretty much means that they don't have an answer to give you. So it is hard, but communicate and be a partner. And I think you got a better chance of getting the answers, even if they may not be the answers you want, but you got a better chance of getting answers if you communicate a lot and you give information as well.
Thank you very much, John Paul. John, over for another question out of the chat room.
Sure. Bill Luck, I believe, is the way it's pronounced, had an interesting comment. I'm not sure it's exactly a question, but he says, all the strategies presented seem to assume that the current geographic distribution of manufacturing will remain the same. Admittedly, a long-term solution, but what about a renaissance of manufacturing here in North America?
What do you think about that, John Paul?
Look, I earn a check that comes from a company in Asia, so I'm a little bit tainted. But you know what? I think that would be wonderful. It would definitely be a long-term solution. But we are a fast food nation. We want our inexpensive food and we want it fast. And at the same time, we want to be highly paid. And in the electronics world, you can't have highly paid manufacturing facilities and have fast and cheap. I would love to see that, right? I'm a good God-fearing American. I would love to see more industrial jobs like that. I just don't see it in my lifetime.
Yeah. What do you think, Eric?
So companies like us usually go with contract manufacturers, whether they're located in the US or in Asia or for that matter, anywhere. The issue is that you can't, there are no contract manufacturers in the US that can provide the level of services that Asia can today. Let me take an example. There's a local contract manufacturer in San Diego, right? The way they survive, they told me, is that they only do prototypes for companies like us, or their big customer is Qualcomm. They just do a fast turn prototypes. They charge a lot of money, but it's coming out of the engineering budget, not production budget, right? So they're able to do those things only and survive. And but even they say that hey, I know that you're going to Asia for contract, the production runs. So there's no point in talking about it. So that's just the reality of the situation. I'd love to use the U.S. contract manufacturers, because a lot of the stuff that we supply to the government, actually, they would like to have the Made in USA label. But the fact of the matter is that I can't get any contract manufacturers to do the kind of things that I need. So we end up going to a lot of them, a lot of cases, Asia. Pure and simple.
Yeah, very good points, Eric. Scott, your thoughts on bringing manufacturing back to the U.S.?
So I suspect I can only echo what has been said. I think it's very economically challenging, and I have a hard time envisioning that becoming a reality in any of our lifetimes, to be honest with you. I just don't see how it can happen. Would it be awesome to happen? Absolutely, but there would have to be some really fundamental shifts in some things for it to even be plausible to consider. I just don't see it happening, to be honest.
Yeah. John, I'm going to take this next one. Harry asked Tim or Scott, what is happening with Ameritron? Well, Harry, if you listen to the presentations today, that's what's happening with Ameritron. It's happening with every electronic supplier, every OEM. It's parts shortages, staffing shortages, delivery problems. It is all of the above, and it's not unique to Ameritron. They are suffering just the same as everybody else. So hang in there. The back orders for Ameritron and other companies that we deal with, and we deal with over 160 different companies, and that's just people that make stuff that we sell. If you put in the component manufacturers for the stuff that we build and sell, then you're into several thousand, and they all have the same problem. Nobody is running at 100% and saying, hey, we're all back to normal. That just isn't it. So hang in there and place your back orders, because that's the only way you're going to get in line to get what you want. And that's just the real thing. John, any other questions that you see?
No, I don't see any more, Tim. I would solicit the audience, if they have any other questions, now's the time to do it.
And while we're waiting for them to possibly put some more questions up, I'd like to go over to John Paul for your final comments here, in case we don't get any other questions.
So, the real thing that I think this whole supply chain disaster should be teaching us is that we do need to be more forward thinking. We do need to be better partners, and we need to communicate more, and we need to be a little bit more patient. So basically, everything my grandmother told me on my 4th birthday is what we should go back to. It's right. If we just slow down a little bit, if we just talk a little bit more, and manage those expectations a little bit better, and be better partners. It doesn't get anybody a TV faster. It doesn't get anybody a microwave dish any faster. It certainly won't help me, hint, hint, Scott, get a better antenna on the roof of my house any faster. But it's probably a better way to live.
Very good insight, John Paul. When it all comes down to it, getting upset about things just doesn't help, and might actually hurt. Eric, your final comments.
In times of turbulence, it's difficult to be a single, one-trick pony, because if you have a one-trick pony, and if that doesn't happen, your company is in jeopardy. In fact, a lot of companies actually panicked and then they did stupid things because of that. So what we have done is to diversify it into different product lines and different market segments over the last few years. So if one product that I mentioned that we're going through a lot of problems, it is part of the picture, but it doesn't drive us or it doesn't kill us if I don't have it. So at least that we can make a decision in a way that we can sit down and make a decision, not panic. So And one thing that that kind of taught me is that, well, it's, you know, at some point people start talking about, you know, like concentrating on a single thing, but that's also got a risk factor associated when things turn out bad. So we try to sort of diversify into different product lines so that we don't actually have a big hole in the revenue stream just because there's one part problem.
Yep. Well, thanks so much, Eric, and I really appreciate the time of everybody today. John, there was another point from Dave. Did you see that up there?
I did. So this is from Dave New. He said, essentially, how do I know if there are actually empty or almost empty containers moving about, because you can't see inside of them? So how is this done?
You know, Scott, you were the container guy, so we'll go over to you for the container answer and also your final comments.
I'm not sure I have an answer of how you will know if they're empty or full. I do know that when we were bringing in some items here recently, we wanted to really ensure that that was the case. So we have multiple vendors throughout Europe, so we're trying to make sure that we coalesce all of that stuff into single containers. So I don't know the answer to how to do that. I have to look into how you can tell what's out there that's not full. My guess is most of them are full. They end up, unfortunately, being transported places and then sitting. For final comments, I think, if nothing else, I would like to implore everybody to learn from what we've learned from what we've been through, and let's try as we move forward to not re-experience this pain again. There's no reason why we can't, as hopefully we move beyond this difficult time, that we can't look back and have lessons learned. An immediate resumption of JIT and just going back, you know, everybody wants to get back to normal, but I would hope that we don't get back to normal in being what has turned out in hindsight to be short-sighted policies. We got to think through it and hopefully improve our processes both in purchasing, engineering, and manufacturing to try to take advantage of some of these lessons that we've learned. And if we do that as a team, and to John Paul's point, communicate and partner, and we continue to do that more completely, I think we have a chance of weathering future storms.
And Scott, great points. And on the empty containers or partially filled containers, Dave, I think it would be helpful if your company is interested in learning more about that to contact several of the logistics companies that are out there, and there are a whole pile of them, and that they would be best suited to answer that question. So I would suggest you talk to the logistics company. And John, you might want to read Ron Jakubowski's note there too.
Yeah. I just want to add to what you said. In my day, when I was close to manufacturing and products, we used freight forwarders and logistics companies, and I would assume that those companies, as you said, Tim, would be on top of this kind of thing, although they're probably overwhelmed as well. Ron Jakubowski had an interesting comment for everybody. Quality in engineering and manufacturing comes from minimizing single points of failure. We need to do the same in design and procurement. I think that's a great comment. And Tim, I think I'll end my part of it by going over some of the things that I learned from the panelists. And first of all, I want to thank all the panelists. We deliberately picked a number of different companies. John Paul from Icom America, of course, represents a large company. Eric Lee with Sileo represents a significant manufacturer, but at a different frequency band than we typically encounter at VHF and UHF. Scott Jones from DX Engineering both makes antennas as well as electronic parts and electronic assembly. So we had a nice mixture of companies here. So, you know, and Charles Kirmuss as well with his land mobile batteries and chargers and so forth. So some of the comments that were made just in time got us in trouble. We got to be careful about readopting that too quickly when this all ends, hopefully at some future point in our lifetimes. Fully packed containers, never ship a container that's empty. Decrease the number of SKUs that you have. Communicate and partner with your suppliers. Diversify your products and diversify your markets so that if one market goes down significantly because you can't supply, you have another market to at least bring cash into the company. Consider redesigning your circuits to minimize parts that are difficult. I wrote something that I can't read my own writing. Order early and order often. Diversify your sources. That's it.
Well,
Okay.
John, thanks very much for your valued comments and also for moderating the Q&A. And your opening slide deck was very tremendous. And of course, this event has been recorded, so it will be available for playback. I would expect that our secretary will get this together here very shortly, and it'll be available right off the Radio Club of America.org website. And if you're not a member of RCA, consider joining. Go to the Radio Club of America.org website for more information there. And on behalf of all the officers, directors, and everybody associated, members with the Radio Club of America, I want to thank you all for your attendance and your help, and especially our panelists who did a tremendous job. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you on our next Radio Club of America. Take a look on the website. We've got a new event coming up very shortly, and we'll be sending out an email blast for that. Until then, all the best from Northern Germany.